My ex showed up to my engagement party uninvited, but what he did before leaving shocked everyone. I was 25 when I finally escaped Damien. 3 years of him controlling what I wore, who I spoke to, and where I went. He'd check my phone while I showered, time my grocery trips, and accuse me of cheating if I smiled at the cashier. The final straw came when he locked me out of our apartment in winter because I'd gotten home 12 minutes late from work. I moved back with my parents and started rebuilding. 6 months later, I met Adrian at a community art class. He was patient, kind, and most importantly, he trusted me. When he proposed after a year of dating, I cried tears of relief. Someone actually saw me as a person, not property. We planned a small engagement party at my parents' house. 50 guests, string lights in the backyard, and my mother's famous lasagna. I was laughing with my college friends when someone gasped. The entire yard went silent. Damien stood at the garden gate, wearing the same leather jacket he'd refused to let me touch. My stomach dropped. Adrian's hand found mine immediately. "How did you get in here?" my father demanded, already moving toward him. Damien held up his hands in mock surrender. "I just came to congratulate the happy couple." He looked directly at me, that familiar smirk playing at his lips. I heard my ex was getting married. Wanted to wish her well. "You need to leave," Adrian said calmly, stepping between us. "Now," Damien laughed. "Of course. But first, I brought a gift." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Everyone's phones started buzzing simultaneously. My blood turned to ice. "Just wanted everyone to know who they're celebrating tonight," Damien announced cheerfully. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. He'd sent a mass text to everyone at the party, screenshots of texts he'd fabricated, photos edited to look compromising, and a detailed letter claiming I'd been cheating on him throughout our entire relationship, claiming I'd stolen money from him, claiming I'd threatened to falsely accuse him of violence if he ever left me. The yard erupted in confused murmurs. My grandmother clutched her chest. Adrian's parents exchanged worried glances. I could see them pulling him aside, whispering urgently while pointing at their phones. "That's not real," I whispered, but my voice was too small. "None of that is real." Damien shrugged. "I've got timestamps, receipts, bank statements. Just thought Adrian deserved to know the truth about his precious fiancée before making a terrible mistake." His voice carried across the silent yard, poisoning every ear. My mother started crying. My father lunged forward, but Damien was already backing toward the gate, that victorious smirk plastered across his face. "Congratulations again," he called out. "I'm sure you'll be very happy together. Assuming he still wants you after tonight." Then he was gone, leaving behind 50 confused guests and my shattered reputation. I watched as people started whispering, some scrolling through their phones, others staring at me like I'd suddenly become a stranger. Adrian's mother was showing him something, shaking her head. His father's expression had gone cold and calculating. I turned to Adrian, desperate to explain, to defend myself, but his expression was unreadable, caught somewhere between the man who'd proposed to me and the son whose parents were filling his head with doubt. "Adrian," I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible over the murmuring crowd. "None of that is true. You have to believe me, please." He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not quite doubt, but not quite the unwavering trust I'd come to depend on either. The string lights suddenly felt too bright, exposing every flaw, every vulnerability, every reason someone might believe I was exactly what Damien had painted me to be. My best friend clutched my arm. "We need to go inside and figure this out." Her voice was protective, but I could hear the slight tremor of uncertainty. Even she was questioning if there might be some kernel of truth buried in Damien's lies. But Adrian's mother was already showing him something on her phone, her perfectly manicured nail pointing at the screen with sharp, deliberate jabs. His father's jaw was set in that way wealthy men have when they're reassessing an investment gone bad. I could read their body language from across the yard. They were telling him to slow down, to investigate, to protect himself and the family name. Adrian's younger sister stood frozen by the dessert table, her eyes wide with something that looked like recognition. His brother had already started ushering some of the more prominent guests toward the house, doing damage control before the scandal could spread further. I felt myself shrinking, becoming that small, controlled version of myself that Damien had created over 3 years of systematic destruction. The version who apologized for breathing, who explained every innocent action like a defendant on trial, who lived in constant defense mode waiting for the next accusation. My aunt was crying quietly in the corner. My uncle looked disgusted. My cousin couldn't even meet my eyes. 50 people who'd come to celebrate my happiness now stood in judgment, their phones glowing like a jury deliberating my character. Then something inside me snapped. Not the brittle snap of something breaking, but the sharp snap of something clicking into place. I'd spent 3 years being controlled by Damien and another year and a half rebuilding myself piece by piece. I'd gone to therapy twice a week. I'd joined support groups. I'd learned to recognize manipulation tactics and gaslighting. I'd worked so hard to become someone who wouldn't be destroyed by a man like him ever again, and I wasn't about to let him win now. I grabbed the microphone we'd set up for toasts, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The feedback screech made everyone turn toward me, conversations dying mid-sentence. "I'm going to tell you all a story," I said, my voice cracking but growing stronger with each word, "and then you can decide what kind of person I am." For the next 20 minutes, I laid it all out. Every detail I'd been too ashamed to share, every manipulation I'd normalized, every red flag I'd ignored. How Damien had started by isolating me from friends, claiming they were bad influences. How he'd gradually taken control of my phone, my email, my social media, saying it was because he loved me so much he couldn't bear the thought of losing me. I described the location tracking app he'd installed on my phone, disguised as a safety measure. How he'd show up at my work if I didn't respond to texts within 5 minutes. How he'd time my grocery store trips and interrogate me if I took too long, checking receipts against my timeline to catch any discrepancies. I told them about the night he'd screamed at me for 45 minutes because a male coworker had liked my Facebook post. About the time he'd thrown my phone across the room, shattering it because I'd smiled at the barista while ordering coffee. About how he'd convinced me that my anxiety and depression were my fault, that if I just tried harder to be what he needed, everything would be fine. My voice broke when I described the night he locked me out in January, how I'd stood in 12-degree weather in a thin sweater, begging through the door while he watched TV, how my neighbor had finally called my parents at 2 in the morning when she found me huddled on the front steps, hypothermic and sobbing. Then I pulled out my phone and showed them the evidence I'd saved, even though I'd tried to delete it 100 times because looking at it made me physically ill. I pulled up my father's security footage from that night, footage I'd saved as evidence. The timestamp showed 1:47 a.m., and there I was, a small figure hunched on the steps, shaking violently. I showed them my therapy receipts. 52 sessions over 18 months with Dr. Patricia Chen, who specialized in trauma from intimate partner violence. I showed them my domestic violence support group attendance records. Every Tuesday night for 8 months, never missing a session. I pulled up the restraining order application I'd filled out but never filed, because Damien had somehow found out about it, and convinced me that filing it would ruin both our lives, that people would think I was crazy, that no one would believe me anyway because he'd never left visible bruises after the first few times. I showed them the emails I'd sent to myself, documenting incidents in real time because my therapist told me I'd need evidence if things escalated. Dozens of emails with timestamps and details, a chronicle of psychological warfare that made several people in the audience gasp. My college roommate stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the patio stones. "She was there," she said loudly, her voice shaking with anger. "I saw the bruises she tried to hide with makeup. I saw her jump every time her phone buzzed. I begged her to leave him for 2 years and she kept saying it wasn't that bad, that he was just stressed, that he really loved her." I watched my best friend disappear into someone I didn't recognize, and when she finally left him, it took 6 months before she could look me in the eye again. The yard had gone completely silent except for her voice, which cracked with emotion. "I knew something was wrong," she continued, "but I didn't know how bad it was until I helped her move out that night. She had a bag packed and hidden in my car for 3 months, waiting for the right moment to run. That's not love. That's captivity." Then Adrian's younger sister spoke, her voice trembling but determined. She stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "I was in an abusive relationship in college," she said, "and I saw several heads turn in surprise, including Adrian's mother, whose face went pale. Everything she's describing, the phone checking, the isolation, the accusations when you try to leave, the fabricated evidence to destroy your credibility, that's the playbook. I know because I lived it too." She looked directly at her parents. "You never knew because I was too ashamed to tell you. I thought you'd blame me, think I was stupid for not seeing the signs. But watching her stand up here and expose what happened, that takes more courage than anything I've ever done." The tide was shifting. I could feel it in the way people were sitting forward, paying attention differently now. But Adrian still stood frozen beside his parents, his father's hand on his shoulder, his mother whispering urgently in his ear. One by one, more people started standing. My yoga instructor, who'd noticed how I'd flinched during class for months after leaving Damien, raised her hand and described the panic attacks I'd had in Savasana, how I couldn't relax enough to close my eyes because I'd trained myself to always be vigilant. My coworker spoke up about the time Damien had shown up at my job, screaming in the parking lot that I was a whore because a male customer had asked me about weekend plans. She'd been the one to call security, and she'd found me hiding in the bathroom afterward, hyperventilating. The neighbor who'd found me that freezing night stood up and described what she'd seen, not just that night, but over months of living next door. The shouting she'd heard through the walls, the way I'd stopped having friends over, how I'd started parking on the street instead of the lot so I could see if Damien's car was there before going inside. Even the cashier from the grocery store near my old apartment spoke up. "I remembered her," she said. "She'd come in every Sunday like clockwork, but her trips got shorter and shorter, more frantic. She'd buy the same things every week like she was following a list. Once she came in with a black eye, and when I asked if she was okay, she looked terrified and said she'd walked into a cabinet. I knew. Everyone who worked there knew. We talked about calling the police, but we didn't know what to say." My therapist, Dr. Chen, who'd been sitting quietly near the back, stood up. "I can't discuss specifics of our sessions due to confidentiality," she said. "But I can tell you that the patterns described in those fabricated messages, the infidelity, the theft, the false accusations, are common tactics used by abusers when their victims leave. They're called DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. The abuser becomes the victim becomes the abuser, and suddenly everyone questions who's telling the truth." She looked around at the assembled guests. "I've been practicing for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of cases, and I can tell you that what just happened here tonight, an ex showing up to sabotage a new relationship with fabricated evidence, is textbook behavior from someone who can't accept they've lost control." The weight of all these testimonies was crushing. I watched as Adrian's mother's expression shifted from suspicion to horror. His father had gone very quiet, no longer whispering, just staring at me with something that might have been recognition or regret. But Adrian still hadn't moved. He stood there, caught between the life we'd built together and the poison Damien had just injected into it. I walked over to him slowly, ignoring everyone else, ignoring the phone still recording, ignoring the whispers. "Adrian," I said quietly, just for him. "If you have any doubts, any at all, I understand. I've spent 3 years learning to trust myself again after someone convinced me I was worthless, crazy, and unlovable. I won't force you to trust me, but I need you to know that every single word Damien sent tonight is a lie specifically designed to control my life one more time, just like he controlled it for 3 years." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "I've never deleted anything," I said. "Every conversation we've ever had, every text, every photo, every location share, every calendar event, it's all here. You can look through all of it right now. You can see the therapy appointments on my calendar. You can read my journal entries that I voice recorded during sessions. You can check my bank statements against his claims. Or you can just decide to believe him, and I'll understand, because living with someone who has doubts is just another kind of prison." My voice broke on the last word. I held out my phone, my hand shaking. Adrian looked at the phone, then at me, then at all the people who'd stood up to defend me. His mother started to say something, but he held up his hand to silence her. He didn't take the phone. Instead, he pulled out his own phone and started typing. Within seconds, everyone's phones buzzed again, and I felt my stomach drop. Was he adding to Damien's lies? Asking people to leave? Calling off the engagement? What he'd sent was simple, direct, and devastating to Damien's narrative. "This is Adrian. The man who crashed this party is Damien Fletcher. He is a documented abuser with a restraining order filed against him by my fiancé. The materials he sent are fabricated and constitute harassment and defamation. I've forwarded all evidence to the police and my attorney. If anyone has additional evidence of his harassment tonight, please contact me. My email is below." He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. Then, loudly enough for everyone to hear, he said, "My fiancé is the strongest person I know. She escaped an abuser, rebuilt her life from nothing, and still had the courage to love again and trust me with her heart. If anyone here believes the lies of a man who crashed a private party to harass his ex-girlfriend, you're welcome to leave right now. Otherwise, we're celebrating the fact that she survived, and that she's here, and that she chose me." The applause started slowly from the back, my yoga instructor and the neighbor, then built as more people joined in until it was deafening, drowning out everything else. But I wasn't finished. Something fierce had awakened in me, something that refused to just accept this victory and move on. I grabbed the microphone one more time, my hands steady now. "There's something else you all need to know." The yard went quiet again, the applause fading into expectant silence. 6 months ago, I joined a support group for survivors of domestic violence, I said. I met 12 women there. Some were still living with their abusers. Some had just left. Some had been free for years but were still dealing with the aftermath. Do you know what they all had in common? I paused, letting the weight of it settle over the crowd. They all had exes who'd done exactly what Damien just did. Showed up at new relationships unannounced. Sent fake evidence to friends and family. Hacked social media accounts to post damaging things. Called new partners with lies. Showed up at workplaces with falsified proof of cheating or theft or whatever lie would be most believable. Tried to destroy their credibility and their support systems because if no one believes you, who's going to help you? My voice grew stronger. 2 of those women lost custody of their children because family court judges believed the fabricated evidence their exes presented. One of them lost her job after her ex sent her boss manipulated screenshots, making it look like she was embezzling. Another one attempted suicide after her ex convinced her entire family she was mentally ill and making everything up. I turned toward the gate where Damien had disappeared, even though he was long gone. This ends now. Not just for me, but for everyone. Because the reason men like Damien keep doing this is because it works. Because people want to believe that abuse isn't happening in their communities, in their families, to people they know. Because it's easier to think someone's lying or exaggerating than to confront the uncomfortable truth that someone you know is capable of this kind of calculated cruelty. The silence that followed was different now. Not shocked or uncertain, but thoughtful and heavy with recognition. My father stepped forward, his face red with emotion. When she told me what happened, he said to the crowd, his voice thick, I asked her why she didn't tell us sooner, why she let it get so bad. You know what she said? She said she didn't think we'd believe her because Damien was so charming at family dinners, so helpful, so respectful. And she was right to worry, because my first instinct was to wonder what she'd done to make him act that way. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. I failed you. I saw you changing, getting quieter, and I told myself you were just growing up. I saw you lose weight and I thought you were finally taking care of yourself. I saw you stop coming to family dinners and I got angry instead of asking what was wrong. I'm sorry. My mother was sobbing openly now. We both are, she said. We should have protected you. Over the next week, I did what I should have done 3 years ago. I completed the restraining order with all the new evidence from the engagement party. Adrian's lawyer helped me file harassment and defamation charges, using the mass text as proof of malicious intent. Then I contacted every woman in my support group who dealt with similar campaigns of post-separation abuse. I asked if they'd be willing to document their experiences. Within 48 hours, I had 17 detailed accounts of men using fabricated evidence, fake screenshots, and coordinated smear campaigns to destroy their exes' reputations. I connected with a lawyer who specialized in digital harassment and defamation. She was horrified by what she read. This is systematic, she told me. These men are following the same playbook because they're sharing tactics. Some of them are even using the same photo manipulation software. We can trace the digital fingerprints. Then I went further. I started documenting everything publicly. I created a blog called The Playbook, breaking down every manipulation tactic Damien had used, every lie he'd told, every pattern he'd followed. I included screenshots of the fake messages he'd sent to my engagement party, side by side with the real messages showing how he'd altered them. I explained exactly how he'd manipulated timestamps, edited photos, and fabricated bank statements. Other women started reaching out immediately, not just his victims, but survivors from across the country who recognized the same patterns in their own relationships. They'd been isolated, controlled, and then smeared when they tried to leave. Many had never told anyone because they thought no one would believe them. The blog went viral within a week. 50,000 views became 500,000. National domestic violence organizations started sharing it. Journalists contacted me. Suddenly, the private hell I'd endured was sparking a public conversation about post-separation abuse and the weaponization of technology in intimate partner violence. Damien tried to have the blog taken down, claiming defamation. His lawyer sent a cease and desist letter threatening legal action, but my lawyer had prepared for exactly that. Every single claim I made was backed by documentation. Police reports, therapy records, witness statements, time-stamped screenshots with metadata intact, testimony from multiple people. We sent back our own letter, inviting him to sue us so we could depose him under oath and subpoena his phone records, social media accounts, and digital devices. The cease and desist stopped immediately. The breaking point came when one of Damien's co-workers reached out to me privately through the blog's contact form. She'd been dating him for 2 months and was already seeing the red flags, the possessive texts, the jealous questions, the way he'd started suggesting she didn't need to see her friends so often. He told her about me, she wrote. He said you were the crazy ex who'd ruined his life with false accusations. That you'd cheated on him, stolen from him, and threatened to destroy his reputation if he didn't take you back. I believed him completely until I saw your blog and recognized every single tactic he's now using on me. She broke up with him and provided evidence of his harassment toward her. Threatening texts, manipulated screenshots he'd sent to her friends claiming she was cheating, location tracking he'd installed on her phone without permission. It was the same playbook, barely modified. Then another woman came forward, then another, then 3 more. Turned out, Damien had a pattern spanning nearly a decade, back to college. 7 women with remarkably similar stories of escalating control, isolation, and then character assassination when they tried to leave. The local news picked up the story after his 4th ex filed criminal harassment charges. They interviewed me, my support group members, the lawyer, and experts on domestic violence. The segment ran for 15 minutes during prime time, showing the fake messages Damien had sent to my engagement party alongside real messages, highlighting the manipulation. The reporter interviewed Adrian, who described what it was like to watch someone try to destroy the woman he loved using nothing but lies and a smartphone. The look on people's faces when they got those texts, he said, his voice tight with anger. They wanted to believe her, but those screenshots looked so real. That's what makes this so insidious. Technology has made it possible to fabricate reality. The story gained traction nationally. I was invited to speak at conferences about domestic violence. Lawyers started using my case as an example when fighting similar defamation campaigns. Technology companies were pressured to add features that would make screenshot manipulation easier to detect. 3 months after my engagement party, I sat in a courtroom watching Damien face consequences for the first time in his life. Not just for what he'd done to me, but for what he'd done to 7 other women. The prosecution had built a case showing a clear pattern of abuse, harassment, and defamation spanning years. The evidence was overwhelming. His digital devices revealed the photo editing software, tutorials he'd bookmarked on how to fake text screenshots, and saved templates he'd used to create fake bank statements. They found files showing he'd practiced forging my signature. He'd even joined online forums where men shared tactics for destroying their ex's credibility. The prosecutor called it one of the most calculated campaigns of harassment she'd seen. The judge called it a systematic attempt to control and punish women who dared to leave him. Watching him in that courtroom, sitting at the defendant's table in a cheap suit, looking smaller somehow, I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, no satisfaction. Just a profound sense of closure and a deep exhaustion from 3 years of looking over my shoulder. When it was my turn to give a victim impact statement, I walked to the podium and looked directly at him. You spent 3 years making me believe I was worthless, I said. That I was crazy. That my perception of reality couldn't be trusted. That no one would ever love me because I was too damaged. When I finally found the strength to leave, you tried to make sure I'd never be happy again. You weaponized technology. You manipulated people who cared about me. And you showed up at the most important moments of my new life to remind me that you were still there, still watching, still trying to control me. I paused, letting my words sink in, but you failed. I'm standing here today not as your victim, but as someone who's building a life you'll never be part of. I'm marrying a man who treats me like an equal. I'm helping other survivors recognize the same patterns you used. And you're here, facing consequences, because 7 women found the courage to tell the truth, even when they knew you'd try to destroy them for it. Damien's lawyer tried to argue that his client had mental health issues that required treatment, not punishment. That he'd acted out of heartbreak and poor judgment, not malicious intent. The judge wasn't buying it. The level of planning evident in these actions, she said, flipping through the evidence file, demonstrates clear premeditation. This defendant researched techniques for digital manipulation. He created templates. He practiced. Then he executed a coordinated campaign against multiple women over the course of years. This isn't about poor mental health. This is about deliberate, calculated cruelty. She sentenced him to 18 months in jail, followed by 5 years of probation with strict conditions. No contact with any of his victims. No unsupervised access to social media or dating apps. Mandatory counseling for abusive behavior. Any violation would result in additional prison time. As they led him away, he looked back at me with pure hatred burning in his eyes, his face twisted with rage. In that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time, not as the charming man who'd swept me off my feet in college, not as the boyfriend who'd slowly isolated me, but as someone fundamentally incapable of seeing other people as anything more than objects to control. I felt nothing. He was a stranger now, a cautionary tale, a name in a court record. Adrian was waiting outside the courtroom. He wrapped his arms around me, and I finally let myself cry, not from sadness or fear, but from relief. "It's over," I whispered into his shoulder. "It's really over." We got married 6 months later on a perfect Saturday in October. This time, security was tight. Hired professionals who checked every guest against an approved list. No surprises, no uninvited visitors, no chance of Damien showing up to try one more time. But I did make one unusual choice for the guest list. I invited every woman from my support group. All 12 survivors who taught me that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up and helping others do the same. They sat together during the ceremony, a visible reminder of how far we'd all come. I also invited the 4 women who testified against Damien. Without them, the case might not have been strong enough. They'd risked public scrutiny, relived their trauma, and faced Damien in court. One of them had traveled from 3 states away, taking time off work she couldn't afford to lose. Another had testified despite her family's pressure to stay silent and not air dirty laundry. During my vows, I did something Adrian and I had discussed but kept secret from everyone else. I looked at those women, survivors, fighters, warriors, and added an unexpected promise. "I'm marrying the love of my life today," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But I'm also making a vow to every person here who's ever felt small, controlled, or broken. Your truth matters. Your voice matters. The people who tried to silence you don't get to write your ending. And if anyone ever tries to make you doubt your reality or destroy your credibility, remember this moment. Remember that speaking up is worth it, that people will believe you, and that there's a whole community ready to stand beside you." The applause was deafening. Several of the survivors were crying. Adrian squeezed my hand, tears streaming down his face. His sister, who'd revealed her own history of abuse at my engagement party, read a poem she'd written about breaking cycles and choosing freedom. My college roommate officiated the ceremony, her voice thick with emotion as she described watching me transform from someone barely surviving to someone truly thriving. Even Adrian's parents, who'd been so quick to doubt me at first, had become fierce advocates. His mother had joined a board for a domestic violence shelter. His father had started a fund to help survivors with legal fees for protection orders and defamation cases. The wedding was everything the engagement party should have been: joyful, peaceful, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported us. No drama, no surprise guests, no fabricated emergencies. Just 2 people promising to build a life together based on trust, respect, and equality. At the reception, I gave a short speech thanking everyone for their support. I acknowledged the uncomfortable truth that most of them had witnessed Damien's final attack, had seen me at my most vulnerable, had to decide in real time whether to believe me or doubt me. "Some of you saw me at my lowest point," I said. "You watched someone try to destroy my reputation and my future, and you had to make a choice about who to believe. That must have been uncomfortable, maybe even scary. But your choice to stand with me, to speak up, to offer evidence and testimony, that changed everything. Not just for me, but for every survivor who feels too afraid to speak up because they think no one will believe them." I raised my glass. To the people who believe survivors. To the ones who stand up even when it's uncomfortable. And to anyone out there who's still in the situation I escaped. Your truth matters. And there are people ready to help you. You just have to take the first step. The toast became a standing ovation. That night, dancing with Adrian under the same string lights that had illuminated my engagement party disaster, I felt profoundly grateful. Not just for him, but for every person who'd chosen to believe me when believing me was hard. For the support group that taught me I wasn't alone. For the lawyer who took my case seriously. For the women who came forward even when it meant reliving their trauma. My blog became a nonprofit organization 6 months after the wedding. We called it the Playbook Project, and our mission was simple: help survivors document abuse, connect with legal resources, rebuild their digital reputations after smear campaigns, and recognize manipulation tactics before they escalate. We created a free app that helps people document incidents in real time with timestamps, encrypted storage, and automatic backups that abusers can't delete. We built a network of volunteer lawyers who specialize in protection orders, digital harassment, and defamation cases. We partnered with therapists who offer sliding scale services for survivors. Within the first year, we helped over 300 women. Some were still in abusive relationships and needed safety planning. Others had just left and needed immediate legal support. Many were dealing with post-separation abuse. The smear campaigns, the stalking, the attempts to destroy their credibility. The messages I received made everything worthwhile. Women telling me the blog saved their lives, that seeing someone fight back gave them the courage to leave. Mothers thanking me for helping their daughters recognize red flags before abuse escalated. Therapists using our resources with clients. Lawyers citing our documentation techniques in court. But the message that affected me most came from someone unexpected. Damien's sister. She contacted me a year after his conviction through the nonprofit's website. "I need you to know something," she wrote. "Growing up, I watched my father treat my mother exactly the way my brother treated you. The control, the isolation, the explosions of anger, followed by apologies and promises to change. I learned to think that was normal, that love meant jealousy and control. When you left him, I was angry at you. I thought you were the problem, that you'd broken his heart and destroyed our family's reputation," she continued. "But watching the trial, seeing the evidence, hearing from all those other women, I realized I'd been defending a predator because acknowledging what he was meant, acknowledging what my father was. It meant admitting my mother's life had been a prison, and I'd helped guard the doors. I've been in therapy for 8 months now. I've started recognizing the patterns in my own relationship. I left my husband last week. Your courage didn't just help you, it helped me see clearly for the first time in my life." I read that message 3 times, crying harder each time. The ripples of standing up had reached further than I'd imagined, touching people I'd never met, changing family patterns that had repeated for generations. Damien was released after serving 9 months with good behavior. His probation forbids him from contacting me or any of his other victims. He's required to wear an ankle monitor that alerts authorities if he comes within 500 feet of any of us. He has to submit to random checks of his electronic devices. Any new romantic partners must be informed of his conviction. Last I heard, he moved to another state and works at a warehouse loading trucks. His LinkedIn profile, once full of professional accomplishments and polished photos, is gone. His social media presence has been scrubbed clean by his probation officer. The charming, successful image he'd cultivated has been replaced by the stark reality of a convicted abuser starting over with nothing. Sometimes I wonder if he's learned anything, if he's genuinely working on himself, or if he's just finding new people to control in ways his probation officer won't detect. I wonder if he tells new partners about his past, if he takes responsibility, or if he's created new lies to explain the gap in his resume and the criminal record that appears on background checks. But that's not my problem anymore. I spent 3 years as his victim and another year as his target. Now I'm just someone who refuses to let abusers win, who believes survivors, and who's building something meaningful from the ashes of trauma. My father recently asked if I ever regretted letting Damien crash that party, if I wished I'd had better security that night. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a long time before answering, considering all the pain and public humiliation that followed. That night was supposed to be perfect, I finally told him. I'd imagined it 1,000 times, celebrating with people I loved, showing them I'd found happiness after everything I'd been through. But perfect would have meant Damien was still out there, still doing this to someone else, and I was pretending it never happened. It would have meant staying silent, moving on, letting him fade into the past while he hunted for new victims. I paused, finding the right words. Instead, he walked right into a room full of witnesses. He documented his harassment in a mass text that couldn't be denied or explained away. He gave us exactly the evidence we needed to stop him, not just from hurting me, but from hurting anyone else. Sometimes the worst moments become the catalyst for the most important changes. My father nodded slowly, understanding settling over his features. "I just wish you didn't have to be the one to go through it," he said quietly. "But someone had to," I replied. "And I had the resources, the support system, and the strength to fight back. Not everyone does. So if my pain prevents even one more woman from going through what I did, it was worth it." Adrian and I just celebrated our 3rd anniversary. We have a small house with a garden where I grow vegetables that would make my grandmother proud. There's a studio in the back where I paint, something I'd stopped doing entirely during my years with Damien because he'd mocked my work, called it childish, said I was wasting time on hobbies instead of focusing on him. Now my paintings hang in local galleries. Small pieces, mostly abstract expressions of emotion, the claustrophobia of control, the breaking point of freedom, the gradual return of color to a gray world. One sold last month to a woman who told me she just left her husband after 20 years. She said my painting reminded her that she could still feel things other than fear. Some mornings I wake up and still can't believe I get to live a life this peaceful. A life where nobody checks my phone, times my errands, or makes me apologize for existing. Where I can smile at strangers without calculating whether it'll trigger an interrogation later. Where I can make plans with friends without submitting a detailed itinerary for approval. Adrian leaves notes in my lunch bag. Silly drawings, inside jokes, reminders that he loves me. Sometimes I find them hours later and just stare at them, amazed that this is what love actually looks like. Partnership. Trust. Freedom within commitment rather than prison disguised as devotion. The nonprofit keeps growing beyond anything I imagined. We're launching a legal fund next month to help survivors fight defamation cases. We've partnered with 3 law schools to create a clinic where students get credit for helping survivors with protection orders and civil suits. We're working with tech companies to develop better tools for detecting manipulated images and screenshots. Every time I see another woman take back her narrative, I think about that night in my parents' backyard when I grabbed the microphone and decided to stop shrinking. When I chose to be loud instead of small, to expose rather than hide, to fight instead of flee. We've helped 743 survivors in 3 years, 743 women who found our website, filled out our intake form, and trusted us with their stories. Some needed emergency legal intervention. Others needed therapy referrals. Many just needed someone to believe them, to look at their evidence and say, yes, this is real, you're not crazy, what's happening to you has a name and it's not your fault. Last month, we hired our first full-time staff member, a lawyer who specializes in technology-facilitated abuse. She'd seen our work and reached out, offering to take a pay cut from her corporate job because she believed in the mission. Within her first week, she'd already taken on 6 cases and was coordinating with prosecutors in 4 states. We're building something that will outlast my personal story, something that will help people I'll never meet. That feels important in a way I can't fully articulate. Like I'm taking the worst thing that ever happened to me and transforming it into something that prevents worse things from happening to others. The students I train in our advocacy program call it poetic justice. I just call it refusing to be erased, refusing to let abuse be the end of the story instead of the middle chapter that leads to something meaningful. Last week, I got an email from Damien's most recent ex, not the coworker who'd first reached out, but someone new. She was the woman he'd started dating about 6 months after his release, before his conviction showed up on her background check of him. She'd found our website after he'd started exhibiting the same controlling behaviors, the same jealous accusations, the same gradual isolation tactics. I'm engaged now, she wrote, planning my own wedding for next spring. Should I worry about him showing up? Should I hire security? I keep having nightmares about my wedding day being ruined the way he ruined so much else. I understood that fear completely. The hypervigilance, the constant waiting for the other shoe to drop, the inability to fully relax into happiness because trauma has taught you that joy is just the setup for devastation. I called her instead of emailing back. We talked for over an hour. I told her the truth. Maybe he would show up, maybe he wouldn't. His probation restrictions made it illegal, but that didn't mean he'd follow the rules. Some abusers can't resist one final attempt to assert control, even when the consequences are severe. But I also told her what I wished someone had told me. Either way, she wasn't alone. She had documentation, witnesses, legal protections, and a whole community of survivors who'd learned that the best revenge isn't about getting even or staying afraid. It's about building a life so full of genuine connection and purpose that your abuser becomes irrelevant. A footnote. A cautionary tale you tell when helping others, but not the central character in your story anymore. Hire the security if it gives you peace of mind, I told her. But don't let the fear of what he might do steal the joy of what you're creating. That's just another form of letting him control you. She exhaled shakily. Thank you, she said. Everyone keeps telling me to just forget about him and move on, like it's that simple. Like 3 years of trauma just evaporates because I'm with someone better now. I know, I said. People who haven't experienced it don't understand that moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying what happened with you but not letting it define every choice you make. It means being vigilant without being paralyzed. We stayed in touch after that call. She sent me photos from her wedding 2 months ago. Beautiful ceremony in a garden surrounded by people who loved her, with security discreetly positioned around the perimeter. Damien never showed up. Maybe the ankle monitor kept him away. Maybe he'd found someone new to fixate on. Maybe, just maybe, some small part of him had actually learned something. But she didn't spend her wedding day thinking about him. She sent me a photo of herself mid-laugh, dancing with her husband, fully present in her joy. That's what winning looks like, she texted. Not him suffering, just me living. I printed that photo and hung it in the nonprofit office. It sits next to dozens of others. Women at graduations, career achievements, buying first homes, holding babies, celebrating milestones they weren't sure they'd survive to see. Our wall of victories, we call it. Evidence that trauma doesn't have to be the end. Sometimes journalists ask me if I'm angry that Damien only served 9 months for 3 years of abuse. They want me to rail against the justice system, to express outrage that his punishment seems disproportionate to his crimes. And yes, part of me wishes he'd served longer. Part of me thinks 18 months total for systematically terrorizing 7 women is laughably inadequate. Part of me knows there are men serving decades for non-violent drug offenses, while abusers get wrist slaps and anger management classes that don't address the root issue, not anger, but entitlement, and the belief that some people are objects to control. But I've also learned that anger is exhausting, that carrying rage is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I'm not interested in letting Damien occupy any more space in my emotional life than absolutely necessary. He got 9 months in jail, but he also got a permanent criminal record that appears on every background check. He lost his career, his social standing, his family relationships. He can't use dating apps without disclosing his conviction. He can't be alone with his sister's children. He has to report to a probation officer monthly and submit to searches of his home and devices. Any future partner who Googles him will find detailed news articles about his abuse. Those are lifelong consequences. And more importantly, 7 women's voices were heard. 7 women had their experiences validated by a court of law. 7 women got to tell their stories and be believed. That matters more than any prison sentence. My mother told me last month that she's been attending our support group. Not as a survivor of intimate partner violence, but as a parent processing her guilt about not recognizing what was happening to me. There's a whole subset of our community dedicated to family members and friends who miss the signs, who feel responsible for not intervening sooner. I should have seen it, she told me, crying in my kitchen over tea. You changed so much. You stopped painting, stopped seeing friends, stopped being you. And I told myself it was just growing up, becoming an adult, settling down. I made excuses because confronting the truth would have meant admitting I'd failed to protect you. You didn't fail me, I said gently. Damien was a skilled manipulator. He knew how to seem charming to you while being cruel to me. That's what abusers do. They show different faces to different people. It's how they maintain control and isolation. If you'd seen who he really was, I wouldn't have believed he loved me in the first place. But I should have asked more questions, she insisted. Should have pressed when you said you were fine. Should have trusted my instincts that something was wrong. Maybe, I agreed. But you're asking those questions now. You're learning the signs and teaching other parents how to recognize them. You're part of the solution, not the problem. She's become one of our most passionate advocates, actually. She speaks at parent groups about recognizing abuse in their children's relationships. She talks about the guilt she carries and how she's channeling it into action. Other parents respond to her in ways they don't respond to me. She represents what they fear becoming, the parent who misses the signs until it's almost too late. Adrian's family has also become deeply involved. His sister runs our social media, sharing resources and survivor stories. His brother handles our website and technical infrastructure. His mother organizes fundraisers with her society friends, turning their charity galas into platforms for discussing domestic violence in supposedly respectable communities. His father had the hardest time adjusting. He's from a generation that doesn't talk about personal problems, that views therapy as weakness and abuse as something that happens to other people in other neighborhoods. But watching the trial changed something in him. I always thought abuse meant physical violence, he admitted to me months later. Black eyes, broken bones, police reports. I didn't understand that control and manipulation could be just as devastating, that someone could destroy you without ever leaving a visible mark. He started volunteering with a men's group that challenges toxic masculinity and teaches healthy relationship skills. He talks to other fathers and brothers about recognizing abuse, about the ways society teaches men they're entitled to control women, about unlearning those messages. Seeing him lead those discussions, this wealthy, conservative businessman talking about emotional abuse and gaslighting, feels revolutionary in its own small way. The ripple effects keep expanding. A high school in our county added our curriculum to their health classes, teaching teenagers how to recognize manipulation tactics and establish healthy boundaries. A university is conducting a research study on technology-facilitated abuse using our data. 3 other states have reached out about replicating our legal clinic model. Last month, I was invited to testify before a legislative committee about laws around digital harassment and image manipulation. I sat in a formal hearing room, surrounded by lawmakers, and told my story again. But this time, it wasn't about defending myself or proving what happened. It was about changing systems so other survivors don't have to fight as hard as I did. The committee passed the bill unanimously. Starting next year, my state will have specific laws against using manipulated digital evidence to harass or defame intimate partners. The penalties are significant. Up to 5 years in prison, mandatory restitution, and automatic protective orders for victims. When the vote came through, I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried. Not from sadness, but from profound relief. Something good was coming from all that pain. Laws were changing. People were paying attention. The playbook that Damien and men like him had used so effectively was being exposed and countered. That's what Damien never understood about showing up to my engagement party with his fabricated evidence and his smug certainty that he could destroy me one more time. He thought he was demonstrating power, asserting control, proving that he could still dictate the terms of my life. Instead, he walked into a room full of witnesses. He documented his harassment in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. He was so confident in his tactics, so assured that his manipulation would work, that he handed us everything we needed to stop him and others like him. He thought showing up would prove he still had power over me. He thought watching my new life crumble would give him satisfaction. He thought the manufactured evidence would be believed because it had always worked before, because society is primed to doubt women, because technology makes lying easier than ever. But what he actually did was force a reckoning. He made everyone in that backyard confront the uncomfortable reality of abuse, not as a distant concept, but as something happening to someone they knew, someone they'd celebrated with, someone whose pain was undeniable and immediate. He gave me witnesses who couldn't look away. He created evidence of his harassment that prosecutors could use. He revealed his tactics so completely that we could map them, document them, and teach others to recognize them. In trying to destroy me, he destroyed the illusion that had protected him, the illusion that abuse is always obvious, always physical, always happening to someone else. The illusion that manipulated evidence is easy to spot. The illusion that men like him face no consequences. My ex showed up to my engagement party uninvited. What he did before leaving shocked everyone. But what I did after changed everything. Not just for me, but for hundreds of survivors who needed to know that fighting back was possible, that being believed was possible, that building something meaningful from trauma was possible. I'm 31 now. I run a nonprofit that employs 8 people and helps thousands more. I'm married to someone who sees me as an equal partner. I paint in my studio and grow vegetables in my garden and wake up grateful for the peace I fought so hard to build. And Damien? He's a cautionary tale. A case study in our training materials, a footnote in a larger story about survival, resilience, and refusing to let abuse have the final word. That's not revenge. That's just truth winning over lies, slowly but inevitably, one survivor's voice at a time.